What would you do if the person you trusted most, your wife of more than 20 years, betrayed you for almost a year? In this story, Daniel thought loyalty and love were enough until he uncovered the devastating truth that rewrote his entire life. What began as high school sweethearts turned into a nightmare of lies, betrayal, and revenge. This isn't just another cheating story. It's about how one man refused to be broken and how his silence became the sharpest weapon of all. Stay with me because the ending will leave you breathless. And if you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Cheating Stories 7. Now, let's step into the story. She cheated for a year. I exposed her and left her with nothing. Daniel Carter first met Rebecca when he was 17. It was the world of varsity jackets, paper schedules, and mixtapes recorded off the radio. She wore a red windbreaker to every Friday game while he carried a chipped thermos that smelled faintly of cinnamon. Their connection didn't erupt in fireworks, but grew like the slow, steady glow that makes you linger in doorways. Daniel admired the way she answered questions in class, careful, thoughtful, complete. Rebecca, in turn, liked the way he held eye contact a fraction longer than everyone else, as if silence itself carried meaning. They practiced adulthood on a small scale, cheap diners after school, early morning bus rides to state tournaments. One summer, Daniel taught her to drive his beat-up sedan, and in that moment he realized he trusted her with more than gears and pedals. By graduation, they had shared so many firsts that the future didn't feel like a cliff they had to leap. It felt like a road they were already walking together. College became their promise. Daniel stocked inventory at a warehouse before lectures and closed a coffee shop at night. Rebecca tutored in the library and filed patient forms at a clinic nearby. They laughed about their patched-together hours, measuring flour and butter like chemists just to stretch meals through the week. When he slipped a plastic ring from the campus bookstore onto her finger, she never took it off. They married at 22 in a courthouse with bright tile floors and a clerk who congratulated them like an old neighbor. No orchestra, only a small speaker that cut out mid-vow, forcing them to smile through the silence. Friends taped wildflowers to the hood of the car. Their first apartment had crooked baseboards and a window that faced a brick wall. Daniel patched the paint and called it charming. Rebecca arranged their mismatched dishes and called it home. Michael arrived the next year, a quiet child with solemn eyes who studied faces as if they carried secrets. Ryan followed after, louder and brighter, the kind of baby who made strangers lean closer just to share in his laughter. Parenthood didn't make their life cinematic, it made it practical. Naps, fevers, endless laundry. Love was budgeting errands, and apologies spoken without keeping score. There were hard seasons, too. The year the transmission failed. The winter both caught the flu but still took turns walking Michael through the night. Daniel believed hardship was a test you passed by staying. He proved it on Saturdays fixing wobbling chairs, on Sundays sealing leaky windows. He taught his sons how to oil a hinge and how to say sorry when you're wrong. Rebecca changed in ways he didn't always recognize. Confidence replaced hesitation. Supervisors praised her, trusted her. When she cut her hair short, Daniel said she looked like she'd always been meant to look that way. When she bought a navy blazer, he told her it made her eyes brighter. He didn't notice how often she looked past her own reflection as if someone else were standing just out of view. Intimacy was rescheduled between homework and shifts, but they still found moments. A glance across the kitchen, a kiss before work. Daniel took comfort in routine, believing that constancy was louder than any declaration. Years stacked. The boys learned to ride bikes, then to lie convincingly. Report cards gave way to driver's permits. Daniel built them loft beds, then desks strong enough to hold their elbows and doubts. Rebecca filled notebooks at school meetings, while evenings became a balance of bills and calendars. Life kept moving and they kept pace, yet shadows crept in. Rebecca's smile paused before reaching her eyes. She stared out the window a little too long, water running cold at the sink. Daniel noticed, but decided not to dramatize. Exhaustion explained everything, he told himself. Responsibility dulled laughter. He threw another load into the washer and believed that stability would be proof enough of devotion. When Daniel injured his knee at work one fall, he downplayed it for the boys and joked with the nurse. He promised Rebecca he'd heal quickly, but recovery was slower than he admitted. He hated asking for help, hated the way the brace turned him clumsy, the way Stairs negotiated terms he couldn't win. Days became measured not by what he achieved, but by what he couldn't. Rebecca became efficient instead of tender. She did what he couldn't, but briskly, without softness. When he reached for her waist, she stepped aside, muttering later. But later kept moving. Daniel told himself it was just a season. He believed the old ease would return. He never considered that distance, if left untouched, hardens into permanence. On their 18th anniversary, they tried a new restaurant. The waiter asked what they were celebrating. Daniel said proudly, 18 years. The waiter whistled. In this city, that's a miracle. Rebecca smiled at the waiter, then at Daniel, then at her glass of water. On the walk back to the car, she slipped her hand into his arm for half a block, then let it fall away. Daniel told her he loved her. She said softly, I know. If you had asked him then what he feared, he would have spoken of money, of injuries, of numbers in a bank account. He would not have said betrayal. He believed their world was safe. That showing up every day was proof enough of love. But another story had already begun, the kind that rewrites everything you thought unshakable. Daniel's injury came one cold afternoon in late autumn when a ligament snapped and forced him out of the job that had once defined his strength. The surgery was grueling. Recovery was worse. A man who had always prided himself on fixing everything, broken steps, jammed doors, squeaky hinges, now couldn't climb stairs without wincing. Weeks blurred into months of physical therapy. The Daniel who once carried groceries with one arm now struggled to rise from a chair without help. At first, Rebecca was supportive. She brought him meals on trays, reminded him of his stretches, joked about how he finally had time to catch up on old movies. She tucked the blanket around his shoulders and told him to rest. For a while, that warmth almost convinced him the storm outside could not touch them. But tenderness faded. It was replaced by sighs when he asked for help with cabinets, by impatience when bills piled higher on the table. Her affection narrowed into routine silence. She stopped kissing him goodnight, stopped asking about his progress, stopped waiting for his jokes to land. Her phone, once left face up on the counter, never left her side anymore. Nights grew lonelier. Rebecca began working late, her schedule filled with excuses that Daniel couldn't quite believe but didn't dare confront. She came home later and later, her hair damp from hurried showers, her clothes carrying faint colognes he didn't recognize. When he asked about her day, her tone sharpened as if the simplest question were an interrogation. The intimacy that once tethered them vanished. No shared laughter, no quiet touches across the couch, only distance measured in footsteps down hallways. Daniel tried to explain it away. He told himself maybe she was exhausted from carrying the household while he healed. Maybe it was stress at work, or maybe his injury had made him paranoid. But the excuses wore thin. Each missed dinner, each unexplained smile at her glowing screen etched suspicion deeper into his chest. Their sons noticed too. Michael teased lightly. Mom's married to her phone now, and Rebecca laughed too quickly. Ryan asked bluntly why she never ate with them anymore. She brushed him off with the word responsibility, but Daniel saw the doubt in his children's eyes. They felt her absence too. He tried to revive what was fading. A surprise bouquet left on the table, a soft touch in the kitchen, an invitation to watch their favorite show together. Each gesture was met with indifference or worse, irritation. She barely looked up from her phone. The marriage that had survived decades of hardship now felt like a fragile shell, one push away from collapse. One night, Daniel woke to the faint vibration of her phone. She had fallen asleep on the couch, the device still clutched in her hand. A man's name flashed across the screen before she stirred and tucked it away. His heart pounded. His mind spun with possibilities. He said nothing. Proof mattered more than paranoia, but deep down he knew. The perfect life he thought he had built was cracking at the edges. The foundation he had spent years repairing and reinforcing was eroding beneath his feet. And no amount of loyalty, devotion, or denial could keep the house from falling apart. By the time spring crept in, the changes in Rebecca were no longer subtle ripples. They had grown into crashing waves Daniel could not ignore. The phone that once lay forgotten on the nightstand now traveled with her everywhere, into the bathroom, into the laundry room, even out into the backyard when she stepped away to take a call. When Daniel walked into a room, she tilted the screen away, thumb hovering over the lock button like a reflex. Affection had evaporated completely. Once she used to brush her hand against his shoulder in the hallway or lean against him on the couch. Now she avoided his touch as though his skin carried a weight she couldn't bear. On the rare occasion he reached for her, her body stiffened, arms hanging limp at her sides. Worse than rejection was the indifference. She didn't even notice the absence anymore. Conversations turned into landmines. A simple question, "How was work?" could spark irritation. She snapped that he was smothering her, that she was tired of repeating the same stories. If he asked why she was late, she rolled her eyes and muttered, "Why do you always assume the worst?" Daniel began to measure every word carefully, terrified of stepping on a trigger. The house that once held laughter now held silence, broken only by the faint tap of Rebecca's phone screen under dim kitchen light. Her late nights became routine. Meetings ran over. Co-workers needed help. Client dinner. Always excuses. And when she returned home, the scents clinging to her clothes were foreign, colognes and perfumes he did not recognize. He asked for answers, but each time she deflected with rehearsed calm. The unease inside him gnawed deeper. One sleepless night, he sat at the computer and typed 3 words into the search bar, signs of cheating. The articles read like a case file on his own marriage, guarded phone behavior, emotional distance, sudden wardrobe changes, late-night excuses, irritability, loss of intimacy, each bullet point carved deeper into his chest until the truth was undeniable. Rebecca fit every description. Still, Daniel clung to denial. For 23 years, she had been his partner, the only woman he had ever loved. Could betrayal really be hiding beneath the life they built? He confided in Marcus, his oldest friend, who shook his head. "She's probably just stressed, man. Don't let your mind wreck you." Even Clara, who had never warmed to Rebecca, cautioned, "If you accuse her without proof, you'll look paranoid." Their words offered brief comfort, but at night when the house lay still, fear returned sharper than ever. He began replaying memories with suspicion. Why were those co-worker dinners always so late? Why did her new dresses look nothing like her usual taste? Why did her smile at the phone vanish the second he walked into the room? Even the boys noticed. Michael teased, "Mom, who are you texting all the time?" Rebecca brushed it off with laughter, but Daniel caught the flicker of unease in her eyes. Ryan muttered bitterly that she had missed his school concert, something she never would have done before. Daniel's heart broke as he saw disappointment settle on his son's face. Who could possibly be worth missing your own child for? The storm was no longer distant. It was here, breaking open above their home. Each unanswered question, each unexplained absence, each distant look chipped away at what little trust remained. Deep down, Daniel knew. The truth wasn't coming. It was already here, staring back at him every night across the dinner table, hidden behind the faint glow of a locked phone. The truth didn't arrive as a whisper. It came like a blade, sharp, merciless, undeniable. For weeks Daniel had lived in uncertainty, haunted by suspicions he could neither prove nor silence. But one restless night, sitting alone at the kitchen table with only his laptop's glow for company, everything changed. He opened their family phone account. His hands trembled as he scrolled through the call logs. Line after line showed an unfamiliar number. Not once, not twice, dozens of times, every single day. Often at hours when Rebecca had claimed to be working late. His breath caught. He cross-referenced the dates with his own memories, the nights she came home exhausted, her hair damp from hurried showers, her tone sharp when he asked too many questions. The The patterns lined up perfectly. Whoever owned that number wasn't just a co-worker. They were a constant, a priority, a secret carved into the hours Daniel had been excluded from. He dug deeper. Against his own instincts, he logged onto Facebook, a site he rarely touched anymore. Scrolling through Rebecca's profile, he found recent photos coworkers had tagged her in. At first glance, harmless group shots, after-work dinners, casual bar selfies, but one face appeared again and again. Jason Miller, younger, cocky smile, always too close. His hand pressed at the small of Rebecca's back, his arm draped casually across her shoulder, their bodies leaning together as if the entire room belonged only to them. Daniel's pulse thundered. The sight of another man touching her so intimately was worse than any guess his mind had conjured. It wasn't just disrespect. It was ownership flaunted in public while Daniel had been at home struggling just to climb the stairs. He clicked on Jason's profile. A wall appeared, blocked. The realization slammed into him. Why would Rebecca's coworker block her husband unless there was something to hide? That night, sleep abandoned him. He paced the dark house like a ghost, fury and disbelief colliding inside his chest. Photos weren't enough. Suspicion wasn't enough. He needed proof no one could deny, proof that would silence excuses, erase lies, and expose the truth for what it was. Marcus became his confidant. When Daniel shared what he had found, Marcus listened quietly, then leaned forward. "You need to know for sure," he said. "There's software. I'm not saying it's right, but if she's betraying you, you deserve the truth." So Daniel took the step he once thought unthinkable. With shaking hands, he installed spyware on Rebecca's phone, syncing it to his own. For hours, the feed was harmless, work chatter, grocery lists, mundane exchanges. He almost convinced himself he had gone too far, and then it appeared. Strings of messages that cut him open. "Last night was incredible. I can't stop thinking about you. When can we do it again?" "Soon. I'll make up an excuse. I need you." The words bled across the screen, typed by Rebecca herself. The further he scrolled, the worse it became. Declarations of love, stolen photos, promises of a future together brighter than the 23 years she had spent with him. Daniel's stomach twisted. For months he had feared betrayal in vague outlines, but reading it, seeing it, was something else entirely. It was like watching his own memories be rewritten in real time. Their vows, their nights holding newborn sons, their struggles through winters and broken transmissions, all mocked, discarded for hotel rooms and office trysts. For 2 days, grief swallowed him whole. He barely ate, barely spoke, barely moved. He sat in the silence of their home, drowning in a marriage that suddenly looked like a lie from the beginning. He thought of the 17-year-old girl who once laughed with him at high school dances, and he wondered if she had ever truly existed, or if she had always been a mirage waiting to shatter. But grief did not last. On the third morning, grief hardened into rage. A colder, sharper version of himself emerged, one that would not settle for quiet papers filed in court. Divorce felt too merciful. Rebecca had destroyed their marriage. Now he would dismantle the life she had built on his loyalty. Standing at the window, watching spring rain streak down the glass, Daniel made his vow. He would not simply survive her betrayal. He would expose her. He would wield the truth like a weapon. And when he was done, she would have nothing left but the ashes of her own lies. For 2 days, Daniel drowned in silence. He barely ate, barely spoke, barely moved. His body went through the motions of living, but inside he was collapsing under the weight of betrayal. Then came the morning when grief gave way to something colder. Standing in front of the bathroom mirror, he studied his own reflection, pale, sleepless, hollow-eyed. He whispered to himself words that felt like a vow. The enemy of infidelity is unpredictability. The thought struck him like lightning. Rebecca expected confrontation, yelling, accusations, maybe even tears. That was what every guilty spouse imagined when their lies came to light. But Daniel would not give her that satisfaction. He would not storm or beg. He would strike differently, with patience and precision. He would become the shadow she couldn't read, the silence she couldn't control. And in that silence, he would dismantle her life piece by piece. The first person he confided in was Marcus. They sat in Marcus's garage, the air thick with motor oil and stale cigarette smoke. Daniel handed over his phone, the screen filled with messages, call logs, and photos that painted the truth in merciless detail. Marcus scrolled, his face hardening. Then he slammed the phone down. "Jesus, Dan," he muttered. "She's been doing this for how long?" "Nearly a year," Daniel said, his voice steady in a way that even surprised him. Marcus leaned back, shaking his head. "You could take this to a lawyer tomorrow, end it." "I will," Daniel replied. "But not yet. She doesn't deserve an easy ending. She buried 23 years of loyalty and lies. I'm not just walking away. She has to feel it, every single piece of it." And so the plan was born. Daniel became meticulous. Each night after Rebecca fell asleep, he copied her texts and photos, archiving them onto a private server. He organized everything: dates, times, messages, screenshots, arranged like evidence for a trial. Call logs were printed, emails stored, images saved. By the end of 1 week, he had enough to fill a binder. By the end of a month, he had 5. Each page was a blade waiting to be unsheathed at the right moment. But evidence alone wasn't enough. Daniel wanted Rebecca to feel the walls closing in long before the final blow, so he changed his behavior. He started coming home later, offering no explanations. When she asked where he had been, he shrugged. "Just out." When she pressed, he answered with silence. He mirrored her own habits with eerie precision, keeping his phone close, typing messages with deliberate care, locking the screen when she drew near. Once or twice, he even smirked at the screen just long enough for her to notice. Her eyes narrowed, suspicion flickering like a flame she couldn't control. Rebecca grew restless. She began texting him more often, asking when he'd be home, who he was with. Once, she even accused him of hiding something. Daniel almost laughed at the irony. Instead, he gave her a faint smile and said, "Funny you'd say that." That small reply was enough to plant a seed of paranoia in her mind, a seed that would soon take root. Meanwhile, Daniel deepened his network of allies. Clara promised to stand by him when the time came. David, calm and resourceful, guided him toward legal resources and strategy. Marcus checked in daily, reminding him that patience was his greatest weapon. They became his silent army, bound not by friendship alone, but by the knowledge that betrayal this deep demanded justice. At home, Daniel perfected his mask. To Rebecca, he appeared distant but not hostile, withdrawn but not confrontational. He gave her no fight, no anger she could twist into her defense. Instead, he gave her silence, unreadable, impenetrable silence. And in that silence, she began to unravel. At night, when she lay scrolling through her phone, Daniel stared at the ceiling, rehearsing the final stages of his plan. He pictured the look on her face when the evidence was revealed, when her family read her words of betrayal, when her co-workers saw the truth she had buried. He saw her reputation collapse like a house of cards. Divorce was inevitable, but divorce would not be the end. No, divorce would only be the signature after she had already lost everything she valued most. The birth of his plan was not desperation. It was rebirth, a transformation. And Rebecca had no idea the storm that was already gathering to consume her world. Daniel knew that evidence alone was not enough. If Rebecca had turned their marriage into a performance, then he would turn himself into a role she could neither predict nor control. He began with subtle changes, shifting routines she once took for granted. Instead of coming home immediately after work, he lingered in the city. Sometimes he sat in Marcus's garage, nursing a beer in silence. Other nights he walked through the park, watching lights flicker across apartment windows like private secrets. When he returned home late, he offered no explanation. Rebecca noticed. Her voice carried an edge when she asked, "Where have you been?" Daniel only shrugged. "Just out." Her eyes narrowed, suspicion coiled in her gaze. He mirrored her habits with precision. He kept his phone close, added new passwords she didn't know, typed messages deliberately in her presence, and smirked at his screen before locking it when she drew near. Every move was a mirror held up to her own secrecy, and she hated it. Through the spyware, Daniel watched her conversations with Jason twist into worry. "He's so distant. I think he knows something. He won't talk to me anymore. It scares me." Jason's replies were weak reassurance. He's probably depressed. Ignore him, focus on us. But Daniel could see the shift. Rebecca's confidence was cracking. Doubt had begun to creep into her words. At home, her frustration grew. She lingered in doorways, watching him with wary eyes. She asked questions without naming what she truly feared. One night, her voice snapped sharp. "Are you hiding something from me?" Daniel looked up from his phone, offered her a tired half-smile, and said quietly, "Funny you'd ask that." Then he walked out of the room, leaving her alone with the echo. Later, scrolling through her mirrored texts, Daniel laughed silently when he saw her panic spill across the screen. "I think he's cheating. I asked him and he just laughed. I don't know what's happening to us." The irony was exquisite. The woman who had betrayed him for nearly a year now feared she was the victim of betrayal. But beneath his satisfaction, Daniel stayed disciplined. He refused to rush, refused to gloat. Every doubt she voiced, every paranoid glance she cast his way, was another brick pulled from the wall of her confidence. He leaned on his allies. Marcus sent timed messages that lit up his phone during dinner, just visible enough for Rebecca to notice. Clara posted photos of Daniel at her family gatherings, ambiguous enough to provoke questions if Rebecca stumbled across them. David provided cover when needed, answering calls on speakerphone with easy familiarity while Rebecca listened in from across the room. Together, they built his mask. To his sons, Daniel remained the steady father. To the world, he was still the loyal husband. But to Rebecca, he became a stranger in her own home, distant, unreadable, untouchable. She wanted a fight she could twist into self-defense. Instead, he gave her silence. She wanted a storm. Instead, he gave her calm. And in that calm, she began to unravel. The performance was working. The stage was set. And Rebecca, once so certain of her script, was now stumbling blindly, unable to see the next act that was already unfolding. October crept in with a sharp chill, leaves burning red and gold outside, while inside the Carter house the air was heavy with unease. Rebecca's paranoia had been building for weeks, fed by Daniel's careful silence and calculated distance. He came home late without explanation, his phone always close, his smile unreadable. She lay awake at night, twisting in sheets, her mind devouring itself with questions she dared not ask. Until one evening she finally snapped. Daniel returned from Marcus's garage, the faint scent of motor oil clinging to his jacket. As he hung it on the rack, Rebecca stepped into the hallway, arms crossed, her face pale with nerves but taut with accusation. "Are you cheating on me?" The words cut through the air like glass shattering. Daniel froze, staring at her, not shocked by the accusation itself, but by the absurdity of hearing it from her lips. The irony struck so violently that laughter burst from his chest before he could stop it. Not a chuckle, not a smirk, but deep, uncontrollable laughter that bent him double. Rebecca's expression faltered, her voice trembled. "What's so funny? I'm serious, Daniel." But he couldn't stop. Every memory of her late-night showers, the hidden texts, the photographs with Jason, all of it replayed in his mind, colliding with the sheer hypocrisy of her accusation. Tears streamed down his face as the laughter kept coming, a sound so wild it echoed through the house like madness. Rebecca stepped back, frightened by the sight of a man she no longer recognized. She fled down the hallway, slamming the bedroom door, leaving Daniel still gasping in the darkened hall. Later that night, Daniel sat in his office, scrolling through the mirrored feed of her messages. His lips curved when he saw her words to Jason. "I think he's cheating. I asked him and he just laughed in my face. He doesn't love me anymore. I've lost him." The irony was exquisite. The woman who had betrayed him for nearly a year now confessed her fears to the very man who had helped wreck their marriage. Jason, predictable as ever, sent back shallow comfort. "Don't worry, babe, you still have me." But Rebecca's tone was different now, uncertain, desperate, terrified. Daniel leaned back, the laughter gone but the satisfaction deep. His silence had cut deeper than fury ever could. She wanted anger, accusations, even shouting, because those could be twisted, excused, rewritten. But indifference. Indifference was a mirror she could not escape. Still, Daniel remained careful. He didn't gloat in front of her. He didn't reveal his hand. To his sons, he was steady, folding laundry, cooking dinner, asking about homework. To Rebecca, he was calm, deliberate, unreadable, and every act of normalcy only deepened her dread. Rebecca began hovering closer, trying to reclaim the man she thought she could still control. "Do you want to talk?" she asked softly one night. Daniel looked at her, offered a vague smile, and shook his head. The silence lingered like a storm cloud between them. Meanwhile, his binders of evidence grew thicker. Texts, emails, call logs, even her panicked messages to Jason, each catalogued with meticulous care. He wasn't just documenting her affair anymore. He was documenting her unraveling. For the first time since discovery, Daniel felt the weight shift. He was no longer the broken man betrayed by his wife. He was the one holding the reins. The irony of her accusation was more than poetic justice. It was the first crack in her armor. She had lied. She had cheated. And now, for the first time, she was the one afraid of losing him. Rebecca thought Daniel's silence meant detachment. She thought his late nights, his unreadable calm, were signs of disinterest, maybe even depression. What she never imagined was that behind that mask, Daniel was quietly assembling an arsenal. The turning point came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, inside a lawyer's office that smelled faintly of leather and ink. Daniel sat across from a sharp-eyed attorney, his binders of evidence spread open like a war map. Call logs, screenshots, photographs, each page cataloged and dated with meticulous care. The attorney flipped through the documents, her expression hardening with each turn of the page. Finally, she leaned back, a thin smile breaking the silence. In New York, adultery is still grounds for a fault-based divorce. With this kind of evidence, you won't just win, you'll control the terms: property, spousal support, custody. She won't walk away clean. For the first time in months, Daniel felt power return to his chest like breath after drowning. This was no longer just survival, it was justice. From that day forward, he moved with quiet precision. He opened new bank accounts in his name only, shifting savings and paychecks slowly, carefully, so Rebecca wouldn't notice. He met with realtors and signed a lease for a modest two-bedroom apartment overlooking the river. It wasn't extravagant, but it was his, a place untouched by betrayal, a place where his sons could breathe freely. At work, Daniel requested a temporary reassignment that gave him shorter hours and flexible time. His boss, sympathetic after the injury, agreed without question. More time meant more preparation. Rebecca, meanwhile, remained oblivious. She was too preoccupied with her paranoia, too distracted by her own fears to notice the ground shifting beneath her feet. She complained to Jason in late-night texts about Daniel's coldness, about his strange behavior. But Daniel saw every word, every anxious confession through the mirrored feed. Each night, while Rebecca scrolled on her phone, Daniel rehearsed his steps. Step 1, finalize the accounts. Step 2, sign the lease. Step 3, serve the divorce papers with evidence attached. Step 4, walk away with his sons, leaving Rebecca stranded in the ruins. Marcus became his strategist, reminding him, slow and steady, don't tip your hand until it's too late for her to fight back. Clara found him a family counselor willing to testify to his devotion as a father. David, steady as always, used his legal contacts to ensure Daniel stayed inside the law's boundaries while still pressing every advantage. To Rebecca, nothing seemed different. Daniel ate dinner at the same table, folded laundry, paid bills. He kissed his sons goodnight and asked about their homework. To her, he looked like a husband going through the motions, distant but harmless. But in reality, every signature, every transaction, every step was another piece of her downfall already locked into place. One evening, Rebecca snapped at him in the kitchen. "Why are you always on your phone? Who are you talking to?" Daniel looked at her calmly, his expression unreadable. "Just taking care of things," he said, and it was the truth, though not in the way she imagined. By mid-October, the war machine was ready, money secured, apartment waiting, evidence airtight. Daniel stood in the middle of their living room one night, watching Rebecca tap away at her phone, convinced she was still in control. She thought he was distant. She thought he was drifting. But in reality, he was building her ruin, brick by brick, plan by plan. Daniel had always believed revenge was a lonely path, a man carrying betrayal until it consumed him. But he was wrong. Even vengeance required allies, and his allies, Marcus, Clara, and David, were more than willing to step into the shadows with him. Clara was the first to act. Rebecca had never trusted her, always suspicious of her friendship with Daniel. Clara used that distrust as a weapon. She invited Daniel to family barbecues, snapped candid photos of them laughing together, sitting shoulder to shoulder, her daughter curled in Daniel's lap. Nothing inappropriate, nothing anyone could call damning, but the images carried weight. When Clara casually posted them online, mutual friends noticed. Whispers began to spread. That evening, Rebecca scrolled through the comments, her face pale. "Looks like you and Clara had fun," she said, voice sharp, eyes glinting with accusation. Daniel only shrugged. "She's a friend, always has been." It was a mirror of her own actions with Jason, smiles and photos framed to look innocent but heavy with subtext. Rebecca wanted to scream but couldn't. To accuse Daniel would be to expose herself, so she stewed in silence. Marcus played his role with equal precision. He made sure Rebecca saw his texts light up Daniel's phone at just the right moments, same time tomorrow, or she bought it. Harmless, meaningless, but to Rebecca, they were daggers of suspicion. He became Daniel's alibi when needed, answering calls on speakerphone with a casual, "Yeah, man, see you in an hour," while Rebecca lingered close enough to hear. David, calm and deliberate, worked from the legal shadows. He coached Daniel on how to document Rebecca's erratic moods without her noticing. Every outburst, every jealous accusation, every panicked text to Jason was quietly archived. Piece by piece, Daniel was building not just proof of her affair, but proof of her unraveling. Together, the three of them became a chorus in Daniel's theater of revenge, voices amplifying his silence, shadows deepening his mask. Rebecca began to unravel. She tried cooking his favorite meals again. She touched his arm at dinner, asked in a tentative whisper, "Do you still love me?" Daniel smiled faintly, answered with a vague, "Of course," then returned to his silence. The half-answers drove her wild. Meanwhile, Jason grew impatient. Through the mirrored feed, Daniel read the sharp edge of his messages. "Why haven't you left him yet? You keep saying you will, but nothing changes." Rebecca replied with excuses. "The kids need stability." "Daniel is acting strange. I don't know if I'm ready." But Jason wasn't satisfied. The man she had chosen over her husband now demanded more than she was willing to give. The tension fractured her world. With Daniel distant, Jason pressing, and mutual friends whispering about Clara, Rebecca felt cornered. Every move Daniel made tightened the noose, inch by inch, breath by breath. One night, Clara texted Daniel a photo of Rebecca slumped on her couch, staring at her phone with storm in her eyes. Underneath, Clara wrote simply, "She's unraveling. Keep going." Daniel leaned back in his chair, binders of evidence stacked neatly at his side. For months, he had been broken, gutted by betrayal. But now, watching Rebecca spiral, he realized the balance had shifted. He was no longer the powerless husband. He was the one holding the strings. Betrayal had left him shattered. But with every calculated move, every whisper, every shadowed ally, Daniel felt himself becoming whole again. And Rebecca, once the puppeteer of deception, was now tangled in strings she couldn't see, strings pulled tight by the very people she never imagined would stand against her. Rebecca had always believed she could balance both lives, Daniel's steady presence at home and Jason's intoxicating attention in secret. For nearly a year, she danced between the two, convincing herself she deserved the thrill, the escape, the validation. But by the end of October, her tightrope finally snapped. It began with guilt. Daniel's silence had grown unbearable. He didn't yell, didn't accuse. He simply existed around her, calm, detached, moving through the house as though she were already a ghost. The absence of his anger was worse than fury. It left her with no excuses, no script to twist. One night after another wordless dinner, Rebecca curled up in bed with her phone and whispered into the screen, "I can't keep doing this." Jason's reply came instantly, sharp with panic. "What do you mean? You said you loved me." I thought I did, she typed with trembling fingers, but I still love Daniel. I can't lose him. I feel sick every time I look at him. He knows something. I can't breathe. Jason begged, pleaded, promised her freedom if she left. But when she hesitated, his tone shifted, demanding, bitter, threatening to expose their affair. The man who had once felt like freedom now looked like a burden she couldn't carry. Daniel, watching it all unfold through the mirrored feed, leaned back in his chair with cold satisfaction. He didn't need to intervene. Jason was unraveling on his own. Rebecca's world was collapsing from both ends, her marriage hollow, her affair poisoned. In the following days, Rebecca's desperation grew. She hovered in the kitchen while Daniel read the paper, searching for any sliver of connection. She touched his arm at dinner, laughed too brightly at his jokes with the boys, volunteered to join him on errands she once dismissed. Daniel responded with polite detachment, never cruel, never warm, just indifferent. The guilt gnawed at her. She confessed her torment to Jason, how Daniel's silence terrified her, how she felt she had already lost him. Jason's replies grew impatient. If he doesn't love you, leave him, come to me. But the more he pushed, the more she recoiled. At night, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her chest tight with panic. Once she whispered, "Do you still love me?" Daniel turned his head, met her eyes, and after a long pause, said softly, "I don't know." And then he rolled over, leaving her in silence. Those 3 words shattered her more than any accusation could have. By early November, Rebecca was unraveling. She snapped at the boys over small things. She cried in the shower. She jumped whenever her phone buzzed. Jason complained about her constant hesitation. Daniel, always watching, archived every message, every breakdown, every confession. His binders swelled with proof, not only of her betrayal, but of her slow collapse. For Daniel, it was clarity. He no longer felt broken, no longer felt like the victim of betrayal. Watching Rebecca drown in the chaos she had created, he felt something sharper, cleaner. Control. The breaking point had come. And Rebecca was walking blind into the ruin she had built with her own hands. Thanksgiving had always been Rebecca's favorite holiday. She loved the ritual of it, the golden turkey, polished silverware, candles glowing on the dining table. It was the one day she insisted the family be together, no excuses. And this year, with her marriage trembling at the edge of collapse, she clung to it as proof that something could still be saved. Daniel let her believe it. In the days leading up to the holiday, he played the part of the forgiving husband. He carried grocery bags, wrapped an arm around her shoulder in the supermarket, even kissed her cheek in the checkout line. Rebecca glowed at the attention, relief flooding her eyes like a woman pulling herself from drowning. She convinced herself the coldness was fading. Thanksgiving morning arrived with the smell of roasting turkey and cinnamon pie. Relatives filled the house with laughter and clinking glasses. Daniel moved through the rooms with effortless grace, greeting his parents, joking with his brother-in-law, carving the turkey with practiced calm. To anyone watching, he looked like the perfect husband, a man who had forgiven, a man who had chosen love over pride. Rebecca basked in it. She leaned into him when others were watching, whispered in his ear, laughed a little too loudly at his jokes. To the family, it looked like reconciliation. To her, it felt like victory. But for Daniel, it was theater. Every gesture, every smile, every affectionate glance was calculated. This wasn't forgiveness. It was camouflage. Later that night, when the guests had gone and the dishes were stacked high in the sink, Daniel called his sons into the den. The hum of Rebecca's voice floated faintly from the kitchen as she scrubbed pans, humming to herself like nothing had changed. "Sit down," Daniel said, his voice steady but heavy. Michael obeyed first, his 19-year-old shoulders already carrying the weight of responsibility. Ryan followed reluctantly, confusion etched on his 17-year-old face. Daniel took a breath, his chest tightening. "There's something you both need to know about your mother." The silence was sharp enough to cut. "She's been unfaithful," he said finally. "For a long time, and I have proof." Ryan's head snapped up. "What? No, Dad, that's not." His voice cracked under disbelief. Michael didn't speak. His jaw tightened, his silence louder than words. Daniel reached for the binder he had prepared, flipped it open, not to the worst of the images, but to the undeniable facts. Call logs, text exchanges. Photos of Rebecca and Jason too close, too familiar, enough to erase denial, not enough to scar. Ryan's hands trembled as he stared at the pages. She lied to us. His whisper was more painful than a shout. Michael reached across, steadying his brother's shoulder. Finally, he spoke, his voice firm. "We'll get through this, with Dad." Daniel swallowed hard. Revealing the truth to his sons was the hardest part of his plan. It was one thing to expose Rebecca to the world. It was another to shatter the image of their mother. But lies could no longer protect them. They deserved honesty, even if it broke their hearts. "I need you both to understand," he said softly. "This isn't your fault. None of it. She made choices that hurt all of us, but we're going to be all right. We'll rebuild together." Ryan's tears came silently at first. Then in sobs he couldn't hold back. Michael pulled him close, murmuring comfort Daniel couldn't hear. The sight cut Daniel deeper than betrayal itself, but he didn't falter. This pain was necessary. When Rebecca finally walked into the den, towel still in her hand, she froze at the sight of her son's red eyes, the open binder spread across the coffee table. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Daniel looked at her with calm steel in his voice. "They know." The Thanksgiving glow shattered in that instant. The illusion she had clung to fell apart, leaving only the raw truth behind. The night after Thanksgiving stretched longer than winter itself. Ryan locked his bedroom door, sat on the floor with his back against it, his phone dark in his lap. The binder's pages, cold lines of call logs, the texts he wished he had never read, flashed in his mind like a siren that wouldn't stop. Months earlier, when his first girlfriend had cheated on him, he told himself it was teenage clumsiness, something you grow past. But this, his mother, it cut along the same line. Only deeper. Michael found him there. He slid down beside his brother without a word. Older sons learn to hold silence. After a long moment, he nudged Ryan's shoulder. "Hey," another pause. "You're not crazy, you're just hurt." Ryan swallowed hard, his voice cracked. "It feels the same, but worse, like the first time taught me exactly where to break." Down the hall, Daniel stood unseen in the doorway. He watched his boys breathe through the grief together. Pain braided itself with relief. At least the lie was gone. Truth stings, but it steadies. Lies corrode. He had dreaded this night for weeks, but now that it had arrived, he felt something click into place, like a bone set back after a long fracture. They would heal, not because the story was painless, but because it was finally honest. The next morning, practicality rushed in. Michael spoke first, his tone protective. "He can stay with me for a while," he said, his eyes on Daniel but his voice pitched for Ryan. "I've got the pull-out bed ready. It's not much, but it's quiet. We'll figure out school rides." Daniel nodded, grateful and bruised at once. "We'll make it work, whatever you need." Ryan packed slowly, moving through his room like a guest in a museum of his own childhood. A hockey trophy with a bent plaque, a guitar he never mastered, a photo strip from the boardwalk, him and his mom pressed together, smiling through salt-sprayed air. He held it too long before slipping it into a drawer, shutting it like sealing a wound. Rebecca tried to play normal. She made pancakes no one wanted, humming tunelessly while she set the plates. She scrubbed counters until the water ran cold. She asked Ryan when he'd be back, her voice bright, too bright. He kissed her cheek out of habit and lied softly, "Soon." The drive to Michael's apartment was hushed, the city sliding past like it was erasing itself. At a stoplight, Ryan whispered, "I don't want to hate her, but I don't know what to do with all of this." Daniel tapped the steering wheel once, twice. "You don't have to decide today, you don't have to name it, you just have to breathe." "What if I can't?" "Then I'll breathe until you can," Daniel answered quietly. Michael's place was small but orderly, the kind of space that made stability feel possible. He had made the pull-out neatly, stacked a few books on a crate beside it, folded a blanket across the foot. "House rules," Michael said with a forced smile. "You get the good blanket, and you control the remote until playoffs." Ryan managed a laugh, small but real. Daniel put a hand on each of their shoulders, a silent benediction before leaving them to the safety of each other. On the way home, Daniel walked the last 2 blocks in the cold. His breath came sharp in his chest, but it steadied him. He thought of years of late-night clinics, scraped knees, parent-teacher meetings, bedtime stories. He grieved for the innocence his sons had lost in one night. And still, beneath the grief, there was relief. They were out of the fog. They were standing in the truth. Rebecca tried again to close the distance. She texted photos of old vacations, left notes by his plate. "I miss you. I'm trying." Daniel read them, folded them once, and slid them aside. Love had been replaced by duty to his sons, to himself, to the truth. At school, Ryan stumbled. He snapped at friends, skipped a class, ran laps until his legs shook. The counselor called Daniel in and they sat together in a sunlit office. Ryan stared at the carpet. "I hate feeling stupid for believing people," he said softly. "You weren't stupid," Daniel answered. "You were trusting, that's different." The words landed, not as a cure, but as permission to stop blaming himself. Michael stayed steady. He texted Daniel updates that looked small on a screen but felt enormous in the heart. He ate dinner. He laughed at a dumb show. He slept through the night. Daniel read each one twice, sometimes 3 times. Relief was quiet, but it was real. At night, when the apartment felt too empty, he wrote lists. What the boys needed, what would help in a week, what had to be ready before the next phase. Each line was a promise that the chaos would not consume them, that betrayal would not define them. And when Ryan sent him a photo of the pull-out bed with the caption, "It creaks like a haunted ship," 7/10 would sleep again. Daniel laughed out loud, surprised at the sound of it. He typed back, "Sailor, we can fix a creak. Proud of you." For the first time in months, his chest felt light. Rebecca, still trying, apologized for being distant, for being off. She called it a mistake, as though infidelity were just a wrong turn on a familiar road. Daniel shook his head gently. "A mistake is missing an exit," he said. "You built a second road." December loomed. Daniel circled a date only he knew, a quiet mark that meant boxes would move and keys would change hands. The next phase was coming, and until then, he would hold his sons steady, breathing for them until they could breathe on their own. By December, Daniel moved like a phantom inside his own home. Rebecca still believed they were piecing things back together, mistaking his quiet for forgiveness. But while she clung to that illusion, he was already gone, slipping out of their life one careful step at a time. Each night, after Rebecca drifted to sleep with her phone clutched under her pillow, Daniel unzipped a duffel bag in the dark. He filled it with shirts, framed photos of his sons, important documents. Then he carried it silently down the block to Marcus's waiting car. One bag at a time, his life disappeared from the house she thought was still whole. His binders had multiplied, 14 thick volumes by now, each one neatly labeled, cross-referenced, undeniable. They weren't just evidence, they were weapons, a record of betrayal wrapped in the plain disguise of paper and ink. Daniel imagined the ripple effect. Rebecca's sister opening her binder at Sunday brunch, her smile fading as the texts came into view. Her parents sitting at their kitchen table, call logs spread like poison in their hands. Jason's own parents reading the explicit words of their son's affair with a married woman twice his age. He didn't need to shout the truth. He only had to deliver it quietly and let the shock waves detonate on their own. By day, he remained the subdued husband. He let Rebecca hug him in front of the boys. He let her kiss his cheek in the grocery aisle. He let her whisper, "We'll get through this," into his ear. She believed time was healing them. She believed silence meant forgiveness. But Daniel knew better. The man she thought she had married was already gone. What remained was a ghost haunting the house, watching, waiting for the moment to vanish completely. Marcus called it ruthless. Clara called it poetic. David called it necessary. Daniel called it survival. For 23 years, he had given her loyalty, sacrifice, love. She had given him betrayal. Now he was giving her the only thing left, consequences. Rebecca, blind and desperate, clung harder. She cooked favorite meals, sent him hopeful texts, tried to reclaim intimacy with soft smiles and nervous laughter. She mistook his calm for reconciliation, his detachment for mercy. She thought absence of anger meant the presence of love. But Daniel had already left her, physically, emotionally, spiritually. Only his ghost remained, moving silently through the rooms, packing away the last fragments of a life she had burned. The storm was close now, and Rebecca, still clinging to her illusions, had no idea she was already living with a man who had disappeared. Snow fell in thick, silent sheets that Christmas Eve, wrapping the neighborhood in a deceptive calm. Inside the Carter house, garlands twinkled, stockings hung neatly over the fireplace, and Rebecca hummed carols as she arranged cookies on a plate for the boys. To her, this night meant redemption, a chance to prove the family was still whole. To Daniel, it was the stage for his strike. He had timed everything with meticulous care. The binders, now too heavy for one box, were stacked in Marcus's trunk, each one destined for the right pair of hands. He had memorized the sequence, her parents first, then her sister, then the mutual friends who once toasted their marriage, and finally Jason's own family. No anger, no shouting, just the quiet unveiling of truth on a night meant for togetherness. Rebecca lit candles on the table, her voice soft as she told the boys, "Your father and I are stronger than ever. This Christmas is proof." Daniel said nothing. He only smiled faintly, tucking his sons into the illusion one last time. As night settled, he slipped on his coat and told Rebecca he was making a quick stop to deliver a gift. She nodded, too preoccupied with her vision of reconciliation to ask questions. The first door he knocked on was her parents. They welcomed him with warm smiles that froze the moment he placed the binder on their dining table. Her mother's hand trembled as she flipped through the pages. Her father's jaw clenched, the color draining from his face. By the time Daniel left, the air in that house was colder than the snow outside. Her sister's reaction was louder, shouts echoing through the apartment walls as she read Jason's name in the texts. How could she? One by one, the binders found their mark. Friends, neighbors, Jason's bewildered parents. Shock spread like fire through dry grass, unstoppable once ignited. By the time Daniel returned home, Rebecca was sipping wine by the tree, the boys upstairs wrapping last-minute gifts. She smiled at him, relief softening her features. "You came back." Daniel studied her in the glow of the Christmas lights. She looked small, almost childlike in her desperate hope, and for a fleeting second he felt the old ache of the woman he once loved. But then he remembered Ryan's tears, Michael's silence, his own years of sacrifice turned into rubble. "I was never gone," he said softly, "but you were." Rebecca tilted her head, confusion flickering. She didn't yet know the storm already knocking at her door, the phone calls that would begin within the hour, the looks that would follow her for the rest of her life. Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing everything in silence. Inside, the strike had already landed, invisible but irreversible. Rebecca thought Christmas Eve was the night she reclaimed her family. She didn't know it was the night she lost everything. Christmas morning should have been filled with laughter, torn wrapping paper, and the smell of cinnamon rolls. Instead, the Carter house was silent. The only sounds were the distant ring of Rebecca's phone and the low hum of the heater trying to warm a home that had already gone cold. The first call came from her mother. Daniel watched Rebecca's hand tremble as she answered, her smile forced. It lasted only seconds. Her mother's voice was sharp, wounded, echoing through the receiver. "How could you do this to your family, to your sons?" Rebecca stammered excuses, but her mother's sob cut through them. The call ended with a final, "Don't come here tonight." The second call was her sister. There were no tears this time, only fury. "You embarrassed all of us, Jason, really? You've destroyed everything." By the third call from Jason's parents, Rebecca's mask cracked. She sank into the couch, wine glass slipping from her fingers as she listened to the quiet condemnation of two people who had once welcomed her like a daughter. The fallout spread like radiation, unseen but deadly. Texts poured in. Friends unfriended her in silence. Family chats went dead. Invitations evaporated. Every binder Daniel had delivered the night before now pulsed through the community like a bomb detonated at the center of her life. Upstairs, Ryan and Michael stayed in their rooms, pretending to sleep, their doors shut tight. Daniel didn't force them into the chaos. They had seen enough. Rebecca finally turned to him, eyes wild, mascara streaked. "You did this," she hissed. You destroyed me. Daniel's voice was quiet, controlled. No, Rebecca, you destroyed yourself. I just made sure everyone finally saw it. Her laugh was jagged, almost hysterical. You think they'll stand by you? They'll see what you've done to me. They'll hate you for humiliating me. Daniel shook his head slowly. They don't hate me, Rebecca. They pity me. They see me for what I was, faithful, loyal, blind, and now they see you. Her phone buzzed again, another name flashing across the screen. This time she didn't answer. She pressed her hands over her face and sobbed into her palms. Daniel stood at the window, watching snow fall heavier than the night before. Behind him, Rebecca unraveled in silence, the weight of exposure pressing down like ash after an explosion. Nuclear fallout wasn't loud. It wasn't fire and fury. It was quiet devastation, the slow poisoning of everything left standing. And Rebecca was living it, breath by breath. The days after Christmas were the quietest Daniel had ever known. Not peaceful quiet, but the kind that follows a fire. When smoke still lingers, the air tastes of ash and nothing feels alive anymore. Rebecca moved through the house like a shadow, her once bright presence reduced to silence and half-finished sentences. She tried to cook, but meals sat untouched. She tried to clean, but the more she scrubbed, the dirtier the walls seemed. Even her voice, once sharp and demanding, was now hoarse from crying. The community had turned. Neighbors who used to wave at her from across the street now looked away. Friends she once bragged to ignored her messages. Family dinners, holiday invitations, gone. Every door she had counted on was now shut. Daniel had seen it all coming. He had delivered the truth, and the truth had done what anger never could. It burned her bridges to the ground. One evening, Rebecca sat at the kitchen table, staring at her phone as if waiting for a message that would never come. Jason had gone silent. His last words had been cruel. You're toxic. You've ruined my life. Don't contact me again. The man she had gambled her marriage for had abandoned her when the fallout came. She was left with nothing, not even the illusion of love. Daniel, she whispered one night, her voice raw. I made a mistake. He looked at her across the room, his face calm, unreadable. No, Rebecca, a mistake is something you trip over and get back up from. You built this, brick by brick, lie by lie, and now you're standing in the ashes. Her tears came hard, shaking her shoulders. She reached for him, but he stepped back. For the first time, she seemed to realize the truth. There was no forgiveness coming, no second chance. The man she had once controlled with her charm, her tears, her promises was gone. Michael stopped visiting the house. Ryan barely spoke when Rebecca tried. Their silence was harsher than words, a punishment she could never escape. Daniel, meanwhile, grew stronger. Each day without her lies felt lighter. Each step away from her chaos steadied his breath. He began walking at night, snow crunching under his boots, cold air cutting clean through the fog she had left behind. He didn't rejoice in her ruin, but he didn't mourn it either. What he felt was something quieter, something sharper. Closure. Rebecca sat in the ruins of the life she had destroyed, reaching for someone who no longer existed. Daniel had been broken once, but betrayal had reforged him into something harder. The woman who once believed she could have it all now had less than nothing, only the ashes of betrayal left in her hands. The year turned quietly. Snow melted into rain, and with it the last traces of Rebecca's hold on Daniel's life seemed to wash away. What remained was fragile but real, a foundation he could finally rebuild on. Daniel signed the papers on a cold January morning. The courthouse was quiet, the clerk efficient, the process stripped of ceremony. 23 years reduced to signatures, initials, and a stamped seal. As he stepped out into the winter air, he felt no triumph, no bitterness, just release. For the first time in months, his hands didn't shake. He poured his energy into his sons. Michael, steady as ever, helped him move into a smaller house near campus. Ryan, still bruised but healing, spent weekends with him, sometimes in silence, sometimes in laughter. The three of them rebuilt routines, pizza Fridays, late-night movies, small traditions that stitched a new family rhythm. The pain lingered, of course. Betrayal doesn't vanish with ink on paper. But alongside the pain grew something stronger, resilience. Rebecca, now a ghost from the past, faded further with every passing day. Rumors about her still circulated, but Daniel no longer cared. Her life was hers to live or ruin. His was his to reclaim. On a crisp February evening, he stood in his new living room, boxes half unpacked, watching Ryan and Michael argue good-naturedly over a board game. For a moment, he felt something he thought he had lost forever: peace. He realized then that revenge hadn't been about punishment. It had been about reclaiming power, taking back the pieces of himself that betrayal had tried to steal. And in that, he had succeeded. Daniel poured himself a glass of water, lifted it slightly toward his sons, and said quietly, "To us, to new beginnings." Michael looked up and smiled. Ryan rolled his eyes but raised his soda can anyway. To us. For the first time in a long time, Daniel didn't feel like a man defined by what he'd lost. He felt like a survivor, stronger for the scars, ready for whatever came next. As the night wore on, laughter filled the small house, soft but genuine. And when Daniel finally turned off the lights, he carried with him the simple, steady truth. His story was no longer about betrayal. It was about survival. It was about resilience. It was about rebirth. And so Daniel's story comes to an end, not as a tale of loss, but of resilience. Rebecca lost everything: her family, her reputation, her comfort. Daniel, though scarred, reclaimed his life and rebuilt it from the ground up. Betrayal always comes with a price, but the question is, if it happened to you, what price would you demand? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your perspective. And if you want more stories like this, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Cheating Stories 7, and join our community of listeners who know that the truth always finds its way out. Thank you for watching, and until next time, stay strong.